Hi everyone, this is Ashley with C-Team Mini Digitals. I'm going to do a tutorial to show you how to use my new Dreamy Ice Cream Dream digital backdrops in Photoshop. I'm starting to create a lot more of these blurred dreamy backdrops because they are super simple, or a lot more simple to use than the other backdrops, and I love the bokeh associated with them. I have open my image that I want to use already, and I have open the backdrop that I chose that I want to use for this image. So I'm going to come over here to my image. I'm going to go to my quick selection tool and select subject. You can use the lasso tool or whatever your preferred method is. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that layer and create a layer mask. And I'm going to come over to my digital backdrop, select all, edit and copy, edit and paste into my image. And now my image is the same size as the overlay, so I don't have to resize it, but of course you want to resize the overlay to fit your image. Now I'm going to go ahead and drag my overlay in between these two layers here. I'm going to, and you can leave it like this if you want, but I actually want to make her a little bit smaller in this photo. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this. Go ahead and keep this selected up here if you want to keep your proportions. I'm going to make her a little bit smaller in this image so I can see a little bit more of that background. Okay, and then as you can see, there's parts of the image right here that didn't select as well. I should have paid a little bit more attention to that in the beginning. Actually, if I go back, you can go back in your history. If I go all the way back to select subject, I can fix that right now, and it's probably easier to do that than to try to brush on. So I'm going to use my plus tool up here, and I'm just going to select that part that it didn't the first time, and everything else looks pretty good. So I'm going to do that over, duplicate the layer, create that layer mask. I'm going to click on my bottom layer here and paste again, so it just goes automatically between those layers. And then I'm going to select that layer for her and drag again. And that was a lot easier than trying to paint this back in. Okay, and now I'm going to come to my layer mask here because I want to brush off with a very low opacity just the edge of this dress here, just so I want it to be a little bit more see-through, not a ton, just a little. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush at about 15% opacity. My black brush, sorry. And I'm just gonna, very lightly, not a lot, brush that off of the edges, just because the fabric is tulle. If this was a solid fabric, I would not do that. But this fabric is a little bit see-through, so I do want to be able to see that in the background a little bit more. Okay, I'm gonna zoom in and clean up my edges. So I'm going to use a very small brush this time, and I'm just going to go ahead and, on 100% opacity, using my black brush, I'm just going to clean up these edges so they match a little bit more and that there's no copy and paste looking sharp edges to them. The hair right here, I'm going to use a bigger brush so I can kind of feather it in more. I'm going to leave it at 100% opacity and just get rid of that sharp edge. I still want it to be blurred because this is a very shallow depth of field image, which is what you're going to need to work with these backdrops unless you add a lot of blur to the edge of your subject. Okay, the hair looks pretty good. There's a couple, okay, lower my opacity and just brush that in just a little bit. Clean up the edges here a little bit more. Okay, and now since there's a couple ways we can add blur. I'm going to add blur to every edge around her too, just so there's a nice fall off from the edge of her and her dress into the background. So I can do that a couple of different ways. I'm done masking, so I'm happy with my lighting. If you want to change your lighting, so the light's coming from this side of the backdrop and the digital, the light's coming from this side on her, from the left side here. So that's good. If you needed to, you could flip your backdrop to switch the lighting. That's super important. See, if I do that here, it doesn't make as much sense because the windows in this digital backdrop are over on this side. So I'm going to put that back. So that's something important to pay attention to. Sometimes this image I do not. You may need to make your subject a little bit brighter. I just use a curves layer for that. And you would need to create this clipping mask so you're only working on your subject, and you could make her brighter or darker if you needed to. I do not want to do this for this specific image. Actually, maybe I do. That actually looked a little bit better when I added a little bit more light to her. It does. I think that looks better. Okay, so now I'm going to flatten my image because I'm done. I just want to add a little bit of blur now. So you can just take your blur tool. I would duplicate your layer so you're working on another layer so you don't lose your work. And you could just go around and just add a little bit of blur to the edges of her. Or I want a little bit more blur than the blur tool gives me even at 100% strength. So I'm going to delete that layer real quick. I'm going to duplicate my layer and I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I'm going to add not too much, probably, let's do 8, probably about 8 pixels. Press OK, and then I'm going to create a layer mask. I'm going to press Control or Command on Mac plus I on my keyboard to invert that layer. Excuse me. And then I'm going to zoom in and use a white brush on 100% opacity. And I'm just going to paint in that little bit of blur to the very, very edge. See how that creates that, it's a nice fall off from the edge of her dress into that backdrop. I'm not going to do too much to the hair because her hair was pretty, had a pretty good fall off to begin with. I'm going to add a little bit to this flower up here. Okay, and now we can go ahead and just add a little bit, because when you add blur, it's not as noticeable on these blurred backdrops. But you want to add in a little bit more noise, because sometimes when you add blur, it comes with banding. So I want to click back over here. I'm going to go up to Filter and Noise and Add Noise. And I'm just going to do like 1.53. I don't know why I use that number, but that's just like my magic number. I use 1.53. You'd probably be fine with 1.5. But that's just the number I use. And then I would be done with this image. It's a lot. You don't have to deal with shadows since this is a close-up image with all that bokeh. I think it's a really, really pretty. I have a lot of different, I just started doing these around Christmas time last year, so I have a bunch of Christmas ones out. I did do, I think, some spring ones, but I'm going to continue adding these to the shop because I think these are really pretty, very realistic looking backdrops that you can add to your portfolio or for your social media accounts. If you have any questions, you can send me a message. If you are a studio photographer, I would love for you to join my group on Facebook. I will link it in the description. I also have my YouTube channel linked in the description. There are a bunch of free, including this one, helpful tutorials on that channel if you want to flip through them and kind of go through and watch some of them to help your composite work.